Hi, this is Adam Elio Berkowitz. I'm here with my dear friend Matthew Mausner. I wanted to talk to him about China because China is hugely important in the world. And the problem is that most Westerners really have no idea what to think, and all they get is propaganda from one side to the other. And my friend Matthew actually lived in China for, was it a year?
A year and a half, about, yeah.
Wow, a year and a half in China. So I think we can go get through some of the smokescreen by talking to Matt. Okay, so Matt, first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I am an entrepreneur. I studied in yeshiva at the tail end of when you were there, and I have a degree in the history of science, and I've lived most of my adult life in Israel, but I chased the startup dream, so I left Israel. I descended to America for a little bit, and when I burned out of my startup, traveled around the world a bit, recovered in South America, actually in Colombia, and then when it was time to make enough money to get back on my feet, I heard that China was very lucrative, so I moved there and wound up being there actually for the first year of COVID. So I was there for 2019 and 2020. So it was a kind of wild experience, and thank God I made it out. I made it back to Israel, but I learned an awful lot that, like you said, I don't think anyone can learn without actually visiting.
Okay, so you actually already burst one of my myths, which is many people think of China as abject poverty, which, I mean, I think, to be really honest about that, I think Americans have a misconception of the rest of the world. They think that, there's this America is the greatest country that ever was, is, and will be. And that's based on, the American dream, whether or not you've achieved it, that every other country is abject poverty and America is wealthy. So it's kind of crazy that you as an American left America to go to China to make money. How does that work?
So I asked lots of friends, where can I make more money than I need to spend so that I needed to get out of startup debt, and I wanted to save up money to move back to Israel because Israel's become a lot more expensive in the time since we first moved here. So I had a friend who actually had been a teacher at a school in Guangzhou, which is in the south. Or no, she was in Shenzhen. But like all those huge Chinese megacities that are right next to Hong Kong. So she put me in touch with kind of a broker. These people set up these jobs. And she said, look, you make about 7 times as much money as you spend every month. And I said, that sounds like a good number. So
Yep.
I looked into it. I actually thought I might teach at a university at first, but it turned out you make about twice as much money teaching at their K-12 schools. So I interviewed, and lo and behold, I got a job initially teaching at a high school. And you would think, oh, teaching English, right? No. They already know English. They're already better.
I was shocked to find out that there are actually more English speakers in China than there are in America. I was also surprised to find out that China is actually bigger than the U.S.
Correct.
So it's a trick of the maps. Americans, or at least I'm really horrible in geography to begin with, and you get this U.S. centric perception of the world. China's huge. It's huge.
China is massive. It's just, it's like a tiny bit bigger than the United States in land area, and its population is close to 5 times as big as America.
Whoa. That's kind of, so it's a little bit bigger and it's 5 times more populous.
Yeah, I think it's over 1.4 billion people, and America's about 300 million. So 4.5 times, whatever. It's An
1.4 billion people in China.
Yeah, it's a quarter of the world. So
Is it?
saying I know anything about China is kind of absurd. It's a
As
quarter
opposed
of
to America, which is 330 million.
yes.
So there's a big difference there.
There's a very big difference. So I flew there in summer of 2019. I went to orientation of this school, and I was going to be teaching literature and history for their high school and junior high school. I asked them like, "Oh, what do I do if the kids don't do their homework?" Everyone in the room just laughed at me. Got a good belly laugh out of that because it's literally not a thing. No Chinese kids don't do their homework.
And they're not learning critical race theory or transgender dance theory.
Oh, well, let me qualify that a tiny bit. What they are being told to teach, well, we got to teach them completely uncensored, direct, the entire American Common Core curriculum. And I met other teachers at other schools, and they teach them the entire International Baccalaureate curriculum, like the European International School curriculum.
In high school?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Why? Because they want their kids to nail the tests to get into Harvard and Yale and Cambridge and Oxford.
Okay. So, I mean, folks, I know Matt. I know Matthew a lot of years. Matthew is one of the more thoughtful, deep, intelligent people I know. You're not an intellectual lightweight, and for you to say that about the Chinese educational system. Where did you go to university?
I went to Yale undergrad.
Okay, so wow. Okay, so this is a Yale graduate, and he's telling me that the high school students in China were slamming it.
They score on, like, there's English language kind of universal testing around the world, like similar tests to SATs, ACTs, math, whatever. These Chinese kids in the school I was teaching at, they score between the 93rd and the 99th percentile on these tests. Same tests as Americans take, English take, Australians, New Zealand. Actually, the countries that are at the highest of these percentiles is Singapore and China. They're higher than any of the English-speaking countries at taking English language placement tests.
Okay. So you walk into this high school, and these are high school students who are really driven to learn in English and not just English. They're already speaking English probably better than most.
Let me back it up a sec, just because I have to tell you what it's like to arrive in China. And yeah, I heard crazy stories. My uncle visited 30 years ago when it really was this incredibly poor country. My cousin visited 10 years ago when there were still people spitting in the street and everything was sketchy and unsanitary. You know, made in China used to be a byword for cheap and flimsy, and you never know what you're going to get. It's not like that anymore. I got there, and it's like Shanghai is a city of 27 million people, and it's so futuristic. It really looks like it's out of some. Yeah, it's tons of skyscrapers, bigger skyscrapers than New York. Epic infrastructure, high-speed trains like the ones in Europe, that go 300 kilometers an hour or whatever. I don't know. Massive subway system. Their bike lanes are bigger than roads in Israel. It's a scale of prosperity that even dwarfs America in a lot of ways. It's just hard to wrap your head around.
So we're not talking about rice farmers out in the paddies, and then a few elite.
Not anymore.
So that's the crazy part. So in America, the big thing is America is supposed to be the haven for the middle class, where and now, I mean, first of all, the wealthy are uber wealthy in America, and there's a whole big market for obscenely expensive things catering specifically to the obscenely wealthy. So America is definitely top heavy. I would think that China, if it's well off, it would be top heavy and it would go to the elite. That's generally what happens in communist countries.
Yes, and so I gather that for the last 40 years, China hasn't been a communist country in the sense of being the way their economy works is a lot more like America used to work in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Which is to say that the government can control things the way, like, FDR controlled the war economy, but he told Ford, hey, why don't you just switch over all your production from cars to airplanes? And Ford was like, sure. And FDR was like, how much is it going to cost? And Ford gave them a number and they paid them. So and then Ford got to compete with Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all. So it's more like the government says, hey, everybody go make this. And everybody goes and makes this. And,
but it's not like these peons who were like sweating away in a medieval factory. So
so I'll get to that in a second.
Oh, okay. Well, so tell me, you get off the plane. What's the airport like? Is it like crowded? Is it modern? Is it old?
It was very modern. There's a gazillion airports too there, but Shanghai's big international airport's magnificent. They have this high-speed monorail thing that takes you to the center of town. They have incredible sort of taxi, Uber-like things. They have many levels of Uber. Uber isn't Uber. It's actually a company called Didi there. But then there's like a lower level of it. There's an exclusive higher level of it. It's like you can get anything, you can get anything to you at any time, anywhere in China. Anything delivered, anything moved, anyone to come pick you up. They have every level of service.
Are the cities crowded?
Yeah, that's a whole. Well, I was impressed with their level of scale. That yes, there were super crowded places. There's crowds like you wouldn't believe. It's hard to wrap. Like I said, I still haven't really wrapped my head around. Later on, I'll get to, but I got lots of sort of side jobs while I was there. I got to consult. I got to inspect factories. I got to be involved in a couple startups. I was doing tutoring of kids. And again, you were saying, is there a middle class there? These were middle class people by Chinese standards, people who work as engineers or managers or computer programmers or whatever. They were paying me basically $100 an hour to tutor their kids.
Wow.
And I could have made more than that. I have friends who make double that, who'd really cultivated these relationships and stuff. But for me, it was just kind of incidental. It was like, oh, sure, I'll do that.
You know, something that you mentioned that this was like, old school America. That's kind of like old school America too. People get a little burned because 40 years ago, a family, the father could work and own a house and a car, and the mother could stay home, and they lived nice, and it was clean and in the suburbs and all that. And you don't get that anymore. So,
correct. Well, I mean, you might still in Kansas City or Dallas, but you don't get it on the coasts anymore,
right?
In America. So yes, in China. So I got to travel around a little bit, and you and I grew up in areas of New York, right?
Sure.
And when you travel around like the Northeast, if you go up the Hudson River Valley or into the middle of Pennsylvania or across New Jersey, you see an awful lot of old factories that are no longer used as factories. Absolutely. They're abandoned, or they're turned into storage, or maybe they became, trendy lofts for artists moving in, but they're not factories anymore for the most part.
If you go to Detroit, you can buy the entire, industrial complex there. It's a ghost town. So yeah, that's very true.
It's hollowed out. So where did all those factories go? So when I traveled around China, those factories are there and they're thriving. And they're full of workers, and they're full of factory owners who are also Chinese. And there's a huge amount of wealth being created, and the wealth is there. It's not all being extracted to some Western multinational. People are building wealth there. What I was told, and I didn't see it everywhere and count, every single person that I saw, but what I've been told is that China raised 800 million people into the world middle class over the last 30 years. 800 million. And when you look at their purchasing power, so things are still cheap there, meaning like you can buy a house or an apartment for $50,000 or $100,000, depending on the neighborhood. Your cost of consumer goods is less. It's not as much less as I thought it might be.
So they raised 2.5 times the population of the U.S. out of poverty.
Yes, so it should be, if you can also do math, that means there's still 600 million people somewhere in China living at a level of poverty that's hard for us to imagine. Very, very intense poverty.
Okay, so you would be wandering around, and it's not like there was an elite running around and you were servicing them, and there was a massive population of poor people. What you're saying is I mean, it's kind of like a Chinese America from 40 years ago, where you have a very clean, well-established, hardworking middle class. And
yeah, I saw lower middle class, like people working super hard, doing deliveries, running cigarette shops, making dumplings on the side of the street. I saw a middle class of people who just, they're working, in factories, solid jobs, moving up the chain. I saw elites. I saw upper middle class. So China really has this tremendous economic growth. It's hard to.
I think that's kind of where America broke socially. America's broken socially because if you're working hard, making dumplings on the side of the road, but that the next rung up on the ladder is accessible, you'll keep making those dumplings because one day you'll get there. In America, there are too many broken rungs. And then there's this, inaccessible God level of, what's the, Maseratis, Lamborghinis, and Bugattis, which I remember when I was growing up, $50,000 for a car was like super luxury. Now they're, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million cars.
The cheapest cars are $40,000 now in America. It's hard to believe. And I feel like we need a better unit of measure. It's like standard lower job, like let's say plumber or something that's the same across many cultures. What's their purchasing power? Can one guy who's a plumber buy a house and put his kids through school and own 2 cars and have a summer house on the Jersey Shore? In America, it used to be yes, now it's no. In China, now it's yes.
Whoa. Okay. I got to take that in. So you're saying like an average Joe or an average Chin or Chang or whatever his name is, an average Chang in China. He's like not some super job like lower management or something like that. He's feeding his family, reasonably decent housing, car.
Lots of cars, but also remember the public transportation is incredible. The bikes, the scooters are everywhere. Motorcycles, every level in between. It's not like in the Western countries. Somehow, I feel like there should be cheap scooters because cars have become more expensive. But somehow it's like scooters are impossible too. There's something very, very broken about the West. Now, I'm not going to say that China is a paradise. There's hellish things about it. When you said the average, 800 million people have moved up to some level of middle class or upper class. I heard there's 200 million rich people in China by Western standards. Great. There's still 600 million super poor people.
2/3 of America is wealthy. Okay.
In terms of being able to live in a villa, I went to tutor the kids in some of these villas. They're living in beautiful villas or huge apartments or whatever, like massive wealth. They have more Teslas in China than anywhere else in the world. Tons of fancy cars. Like the extravagance of the fancy rooftop restaurants and stuff like I saw. There's so much wealth in China. Now, I just want to make a little sidebar here. because people are going to be like, what about Tibet? What about, and we'll come back to this in the education, but
right.
So they told me at the beginning of orientation, they were like, I was like, can we talk about whatever? If the kids ask us questions, what can we talk about? Like, and
okay, now we're gonna go into the part of the conversation about the humanitarian social side. So you're talking about something that I think is, I don't know what the conversation or the dialogue is like anymore, but I have my very strong opinions about censorship around the world. So what could you talk about and what could you not talk about? And how could you talk about it?
So they really weren't. Look, I didn't go there to make trouble. You know what I mean? I was going there because this is an opportunity, and I made a choice to go there, and I wasn't looking to make trouble. I was looking to learn as much as I can, and maybe when I know a lot, I'll say some more. I'm sure I can't get back into China now that I've talked about it. You know what I mean? But okay.
Yeah. You're a really good teacher, maybe.
So they told us I think they called it the 4 T's, or maybe it was the 5 T's, but they don't all start with T. But they basically said there's a few things you can't talk about. Taiwan, Tibet, Tiananmen Square, Hong Kong, and Xinjiang. Xinjiang is the Muslim northwest of China.
Is that the Uyghurs?
Yes. So those are the 5 things. And I was like, well, what if the kids talk about it? He says, well, you can go along with the discussion, but so to speak, neither confirm nor deny. Tiananmen Square is a beautiful tourist site in Beijing. Nothing ever happened there. That's interesting. And
okay, I was an adult already when the protests in Tiananmen Square went down. We had the tank man, the guy who faced off the tank.
Yep.
And the scary thing is, everyone was like, "Oh, look at that! It's amazing! It's amazing!" You never heard of any of those people ever again. No one knows who that man was or what happened to him.
Yeah, and in all likelihood, a lot of them disappeared. But the advantage of having a totalitarian country is we'll never know.
So you couldn't talk about those things, but does that mean that everything else was totally fair game?
Pretty much, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and we had pretty wide-ranging discussions, and even those things came up. And like Hong Kong protests were going on while I was there. And, I was like, well, what do you guys think? I didn't really, to be honest, I didn't know enough about it. Obviously, my sympathies are with the democracy movement in Hong Kong, but it didn't feel like my place to be educating or radicalizing these kids,
So, but you could talk to them and no one walked up to you like with a raincoat in the middle of the night. Master Mausner, we have to talk to you.
Correct. I mean, I heard that there was a kid in the school the year before who started posting some of the stuff that the government doesn't like. And apparently some people came and talked to him, to the kid. So everyone knows that the government is everywhere. And I want to make a couple points, ask your question and I'll start.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, what I hinted at before is I moved to Israel in 1991. I'm an old school hippie. And one of the basics of liberal thought and the basics of democracy as represented by America and even European democracy is free speech. And you left, you said just at the beginning of COVID, I'm horrified at what passes for free speech in America. And the people are asking for more censorship. You said, the 5 things you can't talk about. And people are like, oh, you can't talk about that. That's censorship. No, can't talk about COVID. And there are a lot of different things you can't talk about COVID. You'll
Vaccines, heart myocarditis,
You can't talk about Hunter Biden's laptop.
Right. All sorts of things.
There's a lot of things. And that list is only growing. And
to be fair, there's a big difference still. I'm horrified by what's going on in the West. And we can get into what leads to what and slippery slopes. But in the West, it's like you get shadow banned or you get your posts taken down or whatever, but you don't actually get sent to jail. I mean, some extreme cases like Alex Jones and Andrew Tate, they wind up having their bank accounts seized. But even they don't usually, well, Andrew Tate did just get sent to jail. But in China, you get sent to jail with no rights and no publicity, and you might not come back. So
you're saying the big five will get you thrown in jail.
I wouldn't say it's that simple. We were told that as foreign teachers, don't go there.
What happened to that high school student who pushed the limits?
It's what I understood was that he got a talking to, but that was it. But he's a kid,
okay.
you know. I've heard much worse things that have happened to people more recently.
In China?
People in Hong Kong have been disappeared because Hong Kong kind of got conquered by China. So disappeared means at least 1,800 democracy activists in Hong Kong got, either re-educated or killed or who knows what. Let me just say something about the way the Chinese government lies to its people. Okay? And this is why it's so different from the West.
Okay.
In the West, they'll lie to you and you don't know what's going on. It's like there's 6 different lies. Right? Like, I don't know what's going on America's southern border. There's this story, there's the Democratic lying version, and there's the Republican lying version.
I totally hear that. Even though I am appalled by the Democrats, and I think Biden is a horrible person. If someone says to me, everything they said to you from the Republicans is a lie, I'd be like, that could be true. It could be true.
There's lots of confusing, self-serving lies, and that even goes to like corporate PR that becomes news stories. Everything is agenda, everything is spin, everything is a little wonky. In China, most of the news is extremely straightforward. It's not lies and it's not propaganda. It's like, hey, look, this many factories, this many jobs, this festival, we won these things at the Olympics. So there's the few things that they lie about. It's almost not a lie. It's more like nothing is happening in Tibet. And behind them, you see a guy getting beat up or killed. They know that you know what's going on. And when they're saying that, it's not like a confusing lie. It's a very clear mafia guy standing in front of you telling you, you didn't see nothing, did you? And you're like, no, I didn't see anything.
Well, America may be more polite about it, but I still remember the CNN reporter ducking Molotov cocktails, saying mostly peaceful protests. They will lie to your face in America, and people will buy it. People will buy it. Waukesha, Wisconsin. It was not mostly peaceful riots. January 6th, is like, you can't even talk about it without being labeled, you didn't say, the January 6th insurrection. You have to say that.
All of that might be true, but I still think it's a lot more confusing in America. Whereas in China, it's completely understood what the lie is. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Our friends or my extended family who was in the Soviet Union, they say, like, they think the funny thing is that in the West, we believe the news. Like,
yeah, it's like there are people who will say CNN is news. And I'm just like, it is not news. It is entirely...
It might have started out that way, and I think things have evolved over the last 30 years.
CNN absolutely was a highly respected news source. I remember during the Iraq War that they were in the city taking pictures of the rockets falling and the Americans attacking the city. They were serious news, and now you've got Brian Stelter. And so what you're saying is, I hear it. It's like very compartmentalized, and if you don't go there, then it's the news. But in America, it's all spinning out of control. Everything is all
spun. It's all spun. So also, I want to say that Tibet and Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, are like, they're more like America's West 150 years ago.
How do you mean?
like China is Eastern and Central China is more like America east of the Mississippi. And then there's these vast desert mountain areas of Tibet and Xinjiang, which have much less population, and they're basically conquered, and they're probably genociding the natives. It's a lot more like America was in 1870 or whatever.
Where they were genociding the Native American Indians.
Yes, yes. So I don't think that, I don't know how to say it in English, like America definitely was doing those things and those were horrible, but it didn't puzzle all of America just because they were doing those things. It wasn't good, but it didn't mean that the entire project should be abolished.
You know, America has this, I love America. I don't want to, I think America, anyone who gives America a bad rap, it's like, what's the expression? America is democracy is the best form of government, is the worst form of government except for all the others. America.
I hate that sentence, but I know what you're saying about right, America is still the best country in the world in so many ways.
Right, but you've got to be aware of the warts. You've got to be aware of the bad things in America. Yes, there was slavery, but there was the Civil War, and they got out of slavery. I remember there was, when I was in high school, there was a survey. They said, okay, what was the only country to use a nuclear device in wartime? And this was in wartime, and this was during the Cold War. 70% of the high school students said Russia.
Wow.
So there is a lot of whitewashing going on, and there's also a lot of demonization, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. Whereas in China, it's funny. You're actually saying, I think you're displaying a land of extremes, where 90% fine and dandy, but there's the 10%, which is pretty horrific.
It's really so. There's the scale of law and order there. So it's funny because like in the West they'll talk about like a deterrent, right? Like law and order being a deterrent, and then there won't be crime. Mm-hmm. In China, somehow that works, and I'm not sure if this is a good thing, but women felt safe. Western women that I knew and Chinese women that I met feel safe walking home alone at 3 a.m.
In the big cities? In
the big cities. Like not even the slightest fear.
Get out of here. Get out of here.
And I've actually heard that's true in Japan and South Korea too. So it might be an Asian culture thing and not so much of a police state thing with the women. But like you could leave like your cell phone, just like leave it on the subway with a stack of $10,000 of cash. And within a couple hours or less, the police will come find you and give it back.
Why do you think that is? I mean, in America, it's I don't know.
There's
no like in America, it's free spirit, and I'm tough, and I'm in the Wild West, and I can pull my gun and shoot the outlaws or anyone who's trying to mess with mine.
Well, the West has a lot more problems in the way it treats women in a different way. But petty crime in America is kind of tolerated. Like, I think they don't even prosecute shoplifting up to $1,000 or whatever.
Right. I mean, I've seen videos where you just see people walk into the shops and no stress, fill up the bag and walk out. And
I visited
like California, San Francisco, that kind of stuff.
I visited California a couple months ago. My friends there deliberately have crappy cars. They don't lock the doors and windows. They leave the window open so that the whoever meth heads or whatever.
Like right now, we're dealing with the Antifa's doing riots in Atlanta again. And would you say that if Antifa went to China and started burning police cars and rioting, would you say that they would pretty much be disappeared the next day?
You understand in China that if you do something that makes the police get interested in you, you have a very low chance of coming out of that interaction in good shape. So nobody will steal your phone, even if it's just left there. They'll bring it to the police because they don't want, if you get caught stealing, if you get caught doing other petty crime, the police take you away and you might not come back. And that established is so well that there's almost no petty crime.
Wow. Wow. It's, I've heard that about other Asian, I haven't traveled, but I've heard that of other Asian countries. Just for some reason, I guess because China, they always want to be, there's this Western interest in portraying them as the bad guy. So they're like, oh, they're evil. But you're saying, you got off the plane, you're clearly not Chinese, and people were cool with you.
Yeah. Expats get treated very well. It's weird. There is a kind of open, tactless racism, like very openly expressed by Chinese people.
It's not like you can hide it. It's in your face.
Well, they'll call you white monkeys. So Han Chinese are higher, and then other Asians like Korean and Japanese, and then like white people are down here, and then like, Indians or Thai or whoever else is further lower down, and black people are just like gorillas. I don't know if gorillas are worse than monkeys exactly, but we're white monkeys, they're black monkeys. So I felt a little more kinship with our African cousins or whatever than I usually do in the West, where it's a different status arrangement.
You know what it's like to be treated second rate.
It's a very weird thing. China's so weird. I didn't feel. I didn't feel. You feel like you're a bit of a trained, pet. You're not a full equal there as a white person, as a Western person.
Have they adopted a lot of American culture? I was always amazed, like Japan, they'll take Western culture and they won't even change it, and they'll make it Japan, like baseball or classical music. I mean, they have Japanese classical music. They have, sumo wrestling and other Japanese sports, but they just like take it and it's like, well, it's Japanese now. Does China do that?
Yeah, I think it's similar, except that China beheaded itself. China beheaded itself in the Mao period and the Cultural Revolution, where they really just destroyed their own culture in so many ways. I'm a historian, and I've read a lot of books about it, and I still feel like I don't know anything about it. But I do know that they destroyed a third of all of their books that existed, and you're talking about a 3,000-year-old civilization. They forcibly changed their writing from this beautiful, incredible 100,000 character magnificent thing to 5,000 simplified characters. So that's like,
which is still an awful lot to put on a keyboard.
True. They have a whole weird system. Chinese is so alien, the language, I have to say, like, now when I meet any person from a country where they have intelligible sounds, I'm like, thank God you speak human. We can understand each other. I don't really care if it's Japanese or Arabic. We're way closer to each other than we are to the Chinese.
Is the average Chinese person religious?
No, religion was taken away from them also, including their sort of they have this sort of like extremely truncated version of traditional Chinese culture. Like they still have Chinese New Year, like what goes on right now. Mm-hmm. They still have some degree of like respect for their ancestors, and they have
there's a lot of it used to be ancestor worship, if I'm not mistaken, and they had these little altars in the house kind of thing.
Yeah, Confucianism and stuff, but like Communist China, People's Republic of China, has destroyed most of that, and now they have like a very tame, limited version of that. Some Chinese become Christian. So when I would tell the Chinese that I was Jewish, that they have a lot of respect for Jews, it's a little bit of a stereotype. They think somehow we're really smart, we're good with money, we're good with science, we're good with whatever. So, and I think they aspire to be like us. And, if you know the rest of Asia outside of the People's Republic of China, the Chinese who live in, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Hong Kong, they are more like Jews. They're disproportionately a middleman minority who overachieves.
Right. There's the whole thing that the Asians who went to America they're no longer considered an oppressed minority, even though the Chinese, immigration laws were instituted in America specifically for the Chinese,
Correct.
because they were coming over, and they're 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 not an oppressed minority, but in America they are a minority. So if you go into an average Chinese person's home, would they display any religion?
No, I mean, they might have like cool tapestries. They definitely do. They treat their Chinese festivals and stuff a lot like consumerist America treats Christmas. You know what I mean? Like, there's not a whole lot of spirituality to it, or like how secular Jews treat Hanukkah. It's like one day out of the year you buy some stupid stuff.
I was actually surprised. You mentioned that there are Chinese people becoming Christian. There's an organization. I wrote an article. They list the most oppressive countries to Christians in the world. China was number 8, and it's actually has more Christians in it than any other country, just because of the size, the magnitude, and they're oppressed. They can't worship openly. There are a few. I was told that there are a few churches that are basically for the tourists. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes. There is a couple of tolerated churches that I saw in Shanghai where mostly it's expats, but there are some Chinese who go there, but it's like they had to go through some weird permission process before they were allowed to be Christians. I don't really know how it worked, but I gather that it was complicated and difficult. I've heard horror stories indirectly about like Falun Gong, which has some sort of spin-off Christianness to it.
Right.
I mean, so the Jewish community there is very small, very, very, very small. And I know the rabbi who created it or recreated it, because there were Jews in Shanghai during World War II. Shanghai was the only place in the world that you could get to without a passport. So 40,000 Jews survived World War II by making their way to Shanghai. It's a whole crazy story. But almost all of them left in 1949 when the communists took over. I think all of them. So there was no Jewish community. But now it's been reestablished since the 80s. You know, mostly of expats visiting or expats who come there and work and marry a Chinese person or whatever. So there's a tiny number of Jews. There's a couple minions. So the rabbi that I met, he had to get permission from the Chinese government to exist there. And he said, I'm only here for the Jews who are visiting.
So
I'm not here for Chinese people. We're not going to proselytize.
I have 2 questions, and I'm saving the big one for last. Just as an aside, what was the food like? I've seen some really weird things, like they eat silkworms and they eat some pretty extreme things. Were you into that when you were there?
No. So I just was avoiding pork. I wasn't really exploratory. I heard that in southern China there's a little more of that exotic food stuff. Shanghai was actually more like any big cosmopolitan city. The food was pretty tame. They're not into spicy, but you could still go to a Szechuan place or what are the other? There's several great cuisines in China. You know, there's Szechuan, there's Hunan, there's Cantonese.
I was told that American Chinese food is not Chinese food.
It's a different thing. I mean, and in America, even you have Szechuan restaurants, you have Cantonese restaurants. No, the food was, and so what I did really like, there's Tibetan food and there's Uyghur food, which neither one of them have any pork in them. So that's what I wound up eating a lot of the time.
You could have gotten in big trouble.
Well, no, the food was good. Then I got to be a mashgiach and I got to travel around China and supervise kosher food production.
it's interesting. Like at least on that level, the Muslims and Jews can get together. Like the Uyghurs are Muslims, so you could eat the Uyghur food because no pork. So, so we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
get together.
Meo juro. That's like the only Chinese I still remember. No pork. No pork.
Oh my gosh! So here's the big question. Um, okay, so let me preface this a little bit. There's is a huge threat, um, and Joe Biden famously said, "China eat our lunch." Come on now, he has a lot of personal investments in China. Um, I've heard of this. I'm not an expert on it, but the what is it? Um, the Belt program they have. What do they call it?
Belt and Road.
Belt and Road, where they're restructuring the entire infrastructure of the world to focus all trade on China. And they're well into this, and they're investing big money in this, billions of dollars a year. So the question is, China, a big threat or a potential enormous ally?
Hi, both. I
Okay.
mean, I don't know, especially in the wake of COVID, it's hard for me to believe that separate countries are sovereign anymore. I mean, the way almost every country coordinated their COVID lockdowns and their vaccine policies and their censorship policies in countries that you wouldn't think would get along at all. So I
Mm,
don't know if we live in a world of countries with elected governments. We think we do, but that feels like it's mostly theater at that point. So that might be its own separate discussion. The Chinese are incredibly powerful. The government, even though it has some fragility in its hold over the population, which we just saw with when they did these crazy lockdowns this year, um, I'm definitely scared of them, but I also think they're extremely patient. They intend to rule the world, but they're not in a huge rush.
mm. So
Um,
how do you think, and this is how do you think Israel should deal with China?
so
They've
there was a
actually Israel
there,
has had big projects with them, especially in the ports, and they've shut the projects down. They've shut down business projects in cooperation with the Chinese.
correct. Well, some and the Tel Aviv light rail is being built by Chinese right now.
Right, right.
There's, I think the best way to put it is that we're not separate from China. America's not, Israel's not, Europe's not. The number one trading partner of almost every country in the world now is now China. Um, look around the room. How many objects in your room weren't made in China?
This computer I'm talking on. Yeah.
The computer, the microphone, the mouse, the clothes, the fabric that made the clothes, the chair, everything was made in China. I think in the 90s, Clinton made a deal to just make China and America completely interdependent. China completely needs America or the entire economy collapses, and America completely needs China or the entire economy collapses. Now, Trump woke up to that a little bit and insisted that that the West start building some degree of independence, but it might be too little too late.
Mm.
Um, I can't imagine what it would take to disentangle. I mean, COVID woke up, even the Biden administration realized like maybe it's not a good idea for all of the production of absolutely essential medical materials be in China,
Mm.
you know. So it's not completely, but you're getting a little beyond. I'm trying to keep the focus on what I saw myself personally. I was at the conference a couple months ago of Signal, the Sino-Israel Global Network Cooperation thing, or I forget exactly what it's called, but a friend of mine runs it, a woman named Carice Whitty, and she speaks Chinese. She's been going on and off to China from Israel for decades, and Very, very nuanced, interesting thing. I mean, the biggest thing seems to be that Israel is cutting edge technology, a lot of it military, drones, things like that, in close cooperation with America. And China wants to buy all this Israeli crypto technology, Israeli drone technology, and then America tries to veto the trades. And Israel has tried to sort of pick the middle ground, and it's usually not as much as China wants, but more than America wants to let it have.
Okay. Matt, this has been amazing. If we get a lot of interest, I'll ask you to come back to talk about China. But I think we've definitely got to look at something that most Americans don't get to see and don't understand. And I certainly never got to see and don't understand. So thanks very much, Matt. Be blessed, and hopefully we'll be talking again.
A pleasure.